Welcome to the Elokus podcast. And this is going to be class number 2 in the discourse Mimana Afar Yakov, which is the 8th discourse in the general book B'Shashek Dimu, 5672. And again, this is class number 2 in Mimana Afar Yakov. It's also class number 2 in chapter 29 in the overall book. All right. Today we are holding the first day of Tammuz. It's nice that 36 years ago today was my first exposure to these Hasidic teachings of Chabad Hasidus. So for me, it's a special day, and we add a special l'chaim for that. Since then, I've been soaking up Hasidus, Chabad Hasidus, and now I got myself into a whole new soaker. And this is this part of this long discourse, the longest discourse that I have never learned before, and I'm learning it together with you. So this is something really special. Okay. And we're holding probably about somewhere between 150 and 160 classes now that we've started already over a year ago. So now we're in the 8th discourse in the overall book and the second class. So yesterday we were learning how based on the idea that which we've developed over the last couple of discourses and many chapters, that the root of the oros, of the lights, not the vessels, the roots of the lights is not the lights which constitute the lights in all the sefirot, are not rooted in the pure or Ein Sof itself. It's not or Ein Sof, and then Tzimtzum, contraction, and then we have Kav, this Kav that splits into 10 lights which animate and enliven the sefirot, the attributes, which become the soul of the spheres. That's not how it works. But rather, even before the Tzimtzum, before the contraction, there is already a shoresh, there is already a root for the spherotic lights. And what is that? That is that within the Or Ein Sof, when there was a desire to illuminate and to shine to somebody, as opposed to just shining light, when there was a desire to direct that light to a recipient. And at that time, so to speak, whatever that means in time, there was an estimation of what that recipient would be like. So even though we're still completely in Or Ein Sof, but Or Ein Sof is already thinking about some kind of a limitation, that itself brings about in the Or Ein Sof a narrowness with a potential for 10 spheros, a narrower light. Now, initially, this light is undetectable because it's still submerged completely and completely one with the greater Or Ein Sof, which is called Spheros Ein Kates. The level where the lights, where the sphera potential is absolutely infinite. And now we're already narrowing down that sphera potential to 10 powers. But at this point, you can't even, that within the greater Or Ein Sof, there is a secondary level of Or Ein Sof. So it will take the great Tzimtzum, like we learned in the earlier chapters, which that great Tzimtzum, which that great Tzimtzum lowers this Esespheres Agnuzos, transitions them to the light of the Kav, which of the 10 particular lights, as they will then come showering down into the world of Atzilus, and each light picking up its own vessel. Now, this tzimtzum, this contraction on the Or Ein Sof, we learned has 2 phases of the contraction itself. One of them is to first hide the Spheros Ein Kates element completely, and that's B'derech Siluk, in a manner of a complete removal. And there's nothing left of that besides a little mark, like we discussed earlier, which we're not going to go over again. And then in addition to that what that does is it kind of highlights the the Esespheris Agnuzais from within it, the Orin Sof. It kind of cordals it off, and sets it kind of to be present, because the other light gets lost. So now this light, the Orin Sof, is seen as a potential for 10 spheres. But because it's still Orin Sof, all the spheros here are on a very elevated state, and they're in a very completely unified state, one with each other. And therefore, there is no differentiation and no recognition of each sphere. Then you have a massive reduction. This is not a withdrawal. This is a reduction to be able to produce each sphere individually. This is the second phase of the tzimtzum, which allows these spheres to come out individually. And based on this concept, we've developed the idea that the oiros, the lights, compared to their source, are both yesh me'ayin, something totally new, and yahelim. It's yesh me'ayin because to the real original Orin Sof, these lights are considered already something totally new, because they have already character and definition. When the Orin was utterly pashut. This secondary level of the Orin Sof, called Esespheris Agnuzos, albeit that it is so subtle and so undifferentiatable and so unified with the original Orin Sof, whatever we're going to say how pashut it is already a source for spheros. And with this idea, based on this idea, which is, again, remember, this whole idea is according to the Arizal, not according to the Ramak, but based on this idea, will lend, and this is where he's coming to explain over here, in this new Maamor that we're learning, will now be able to understand how the lights are able to engage with the vessels, not only engage with the vessels, become enveloped in the vessels, and not only become enveloped in the vessels, but become enclosed in the vessels, and the vessels get a grasp on the lights. And here we go back to something that we might have forgotten already. We're holding in chapter 29. We go back to, which is, I think, the fourth discourse, or maybe the third discourse. In that discourse, he asked a great question. How do the lights, how does a finite vessel grasp an infinite light? So if the lights would just be present in the vessels but not enclosed in the vessels, it wouldn't be a question. The lights are kind of hovering on the vessels. But since we know that the lights of Atzilus become enclosed in the vessels, similar to like the soul becomes enclosed in the body, and the body kind of gets a grip on it, and the energy of the soul becomes assimilated and one with the body, and becomes very body-like. Soul, when the soul is in the body does a, I don't know what you call it, does a, what word I'm looking for. It leaves a unquestionable, it transforms the soul and makes it very body-like. The powers of the soul become enormously reduced and more physicalized when we're in the body. Like we discussed a long time, that the power of vision that's in the soul itself, in a naked soul and in a bodiless soul, is completely different than the vision that happens when we have physical vision. When the power of vision of the soul becomes enclosed and physicalized, it's the same essence, but it's a complete different experience. Same as all the powers, intelligence and emotions and so on and so forth. So the same is with the lights of Atzilus, that the oiros go into the vessels and become assimilated and grasped by the vessels. And the question then is, how can, the vessels are finite because they have already real definition. Even the vessels of Atzilus that are divine, we discussed earlier, they're the Koach HaGvul. It's the first revelation of the power of a limited entities within, so to speak, within God. It's unified with God, but it's the first revelation of Koach HaGvul. So they are limited because they are Chesed, Gevura, so on and so forth. Obviously, a very much higher limitation that we can even begin to fathom, but it's still a limitation. And if the lights are utterly infinite and Ein Sof, he asks in chapter 12, how can a finite body enclose within it an infinite light? That's an impossibility. But now, finally, the question of chapter 12 gets answered in chapter 29. He says, based on everything that we learned now, we find out that the lights are not, then we were on the assumption that the lights that go into the kelim are pashut betachlis apshitas, which means they're pure revelation of Or Ein Sof. Maybe they've been minimized and reduced, but it's really still a pure reflection of Or Ein Sof. If it's pure reflection of Or Ein Sof, then it's Or Ein Sof. It's simple. It's utterly simple. It has no coloring at all. It has no flavor at all. It has no leaning to anything at all. It is simple with utter abstraction, abstract to the 1,000 million percent abstract. Then there's nothing to grasp. Then you're right. Then it would be that question. But since we're learning over here that from the very get-go of the get-go, there's something called an Or Pnimi in the Or Ein Sof. Although that Or Pnimi, which means the light that's meant to be internalized in vessels, we call it Mamala Kalalman, the indwelling light, while it is still in the Or Ein Sof. It is already a narrowness. The light itself has already lowered itself before it's even engaging with Kalim. It's way, way above any vessels. But because it's thinking about going into Kalim, about going into vessels, that itself is already the beginning of the conditioning of the light in the Kalim, and that happens already in the Or Ein Sof itself. And then through the process of the powerful tzimtzum that happens, the two stages of tzimtzum that happens, it further lowers and conditions the light until the lights are really ready to go into vessels and allow themselves to be grasped by the vessels. Now, let's be clear. When the lights prior to going into the vessel and the light after they go into the vessels are very, very different. When the lights are still above the vessels, even after the tzimtzum, they're still primarily pashut, simple. In other words, to any onlooker, no one will see the slight coloring in this light. The light will look like pure light. You wouldn't see the slight tinge of red or the slight tinge of green in it. It's utterly undetectable. But when it goes into the vessels bring out that particular color of the light. Highlight it, strengthen it, and give it much more substance. Suddenly, the limitations of the light, the slight hints that no one noticed. It's like in these wine tasters, they tell you there's a little vanilla over there, right? So if you don't have a professional wine taster, no one in the world knows there's any vanilla there. But once the guy said there's vanilla there, now suddenly everybody's a maven. Everybody tastes the hints of plum and that's there in the wine. Okay. You can say you can find to your taste, but this idea that we're trying to bring out of here. There is a very, 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 very subtle thing that's already there, because once the intention of the spheros in the Or Ein Sof was to go into Kalim, it already produced a potential of 10. Now, that further becomes highlighted when the lights pass through the tzimtzum and get in the kav, but it's still very lofty. And then when they settle into the vessels will really do a job on those lights to really strengthen their definitions or highlight their definitions, thereby limiting the lights as well. And this is the idea that we're going to learn now in chapter 29. We are holding over here. Uh, let's go back. We started chapter 29, but we're just going to go back over here. Who? The reason they're able to go into the vessels, because in the lights, even when they are in their root and in their source, even in the Orein Sof itself, they are bipchinas, in a state of 10 spheres. Who? Obviously, not in the Orein Sof on the level of spheros and gates, but where there was already the will in God already has arisen, which is the idea of the hashara. Hashara meaning the estimation, where he was already thinking of a recipient to shine in a measured manner, in a limited manner. Even though in that state they are in a perfect state of unity one with each other, which means you wouldn't even notice these light, nuanced hints of flavor or whatever, color or whatever you want to call it. They are so pashut. They're not recognized even for themselves, not even an outsider. All it is just seems to be just a pure, simple light. It is already in a state of 10 spheres. And the way that they're drawn down, and the way they reveal themselves is through a process of reduction. And since it's now again, because what he's saying is, okay, since it's 10 spheres, but since the 10 spheres are so undetectable, even that shouldn't be enough that the Kalim should be able to grasp them, because they're still infinite. Yes, there is a slight note over there, but no one knows that. No one sees that. So for all practical purposes, it's infinite. It's Orein Sof. That's why he says. And the way they reveal themselves, which means they come down to engage with the Kalim, to interact with the Kalim, is through a process of a tzimtzum, which he explains now. And the way in which they come forward and reveal themselves, which is through the tzimtzum, which the tzimtzum filters the Ein Sofishness of it, filters out that boundless infinity of it. The first level of the tzimtzum completely removes the utter Ein Sof, the other, so to speak, the higher element of the light, where there is no spheros. It filters that out completely. And the second element of the tzimtzum takes these spheros agnuzos from their abstract, subtle state and thickens them by diminishing the light, by separating each one separately. Now they become commensurate with the vessels, and they become far more prepared to enter the vessels. And when they will enter the vessels, they will become more pronounced in their differences. They will become more substantial. Through the tzimtzum. What happens? The spheres are now being delivered, individual spheres on their own. This makes them this makes them recognizable. And therefore, now they can settle into the vessels. However, he says, let's understand this. We're not talking about the vessels of creation. They cannot, because they're still in a pchina of Ein Sof, they're not going to settle into the vessels of the three lower worlds, Bria, Yetzir, and Asir, which are created vessels. They're going to unify with vessels that even those vessels are considered one with God. Those Kalim that are really still in a level of divine, which are the Kalim of Atzilus. And even though, but now he's going to ask, hold it. Since the 10 spheros, while they are before the tzimtzum, right? And let's say after the first tzimtzum, but before the second tzimtzum. Which means, let's already say that the 10 spheros have already been segregated from the rest of the Orein Sof. And now you kind of have that idea that there's 10 spheros over here. But even then, it's still Ein Sof. And what? And therefore, at that point, all you're seeing is pshitus, is feeling Ein Sof. So what? What are you doing now? You're saying, it's a tzimtzum. And what does the tzimtzum do? The tzimtzum, changes it. But the tzimtzum doesn't really change it. What is the tzimtzum? If the second tzimtzum would be like the first tzimtzum, which would mean a complete removal, then what would be produced after, remember, now we're focusing on two phases in the tzimtzum. So once you had the first tzimtzum, going to give that to you. The siluk, it's completely removed the earlier or Ein Sof. Good. But the second tzimtzum is only a tzimtzum b'derech miyut. It's only a diminishment. If it's a tzimtzum b'derech miyut, means that in essence, the same substance that was before is here now. It's just not shining so brightly. It's like dimming a light. Fine. But it's the same substance. And if the original substance is the substance that is that has no definitions, it's Ein Sof, you still have the question, how can it go into vessels? That's what he's asking now. And even though the tzimtzum, in as much as the esespheres agnuzais are, as we referred to it earlier, in as much as the shorshe ha'oiros are, in the secondary level of the Ein Sof, v'agam shetzimtzum b'chinas miyot levad is only a reduction. The inyan of miyot, and what is the inyan of miyot? Hu b'chinas gilui me'helim. Gilui me'helim means what once was is now revealing itself. It's not creating yesh me'ayin. It's nothing new, which means it's a continuation. What was before, just more highlighted, more revealed, more expressed. Giloy HaHelam, it's a revelation of what was concealed. And since the Helam over here, the concealment was Ein Sof, so it's still Ein Sof. How does it go into Kelim? Now he says in parentheses, which this is the difference between miyot, diminishment, and siluk, and removal. The miyot, what does miyot mean? That the whatever comes forth is a continuation and therefore has certain value to its source. It's not something new. It's not inconsequential to its source. It is consequential to its source. What was in the source feels like it's expressing itself in it. So it has an erech, it has a value to its source. The siluku be'enaroch. When there is a siluk means there's nothing left from what was before. That makes it be enaroch, that there's no connection between what was and what will be. Then it's like something, then it is like something new. So all of this, so once, what is he highlighting over here? So once we know that this is the second phase of the tzimtzum is only a miyot, which means it's less tzimtzum, which means less contraction. If it's less contraction, means the product is more similar to the source. If the product is more similar to the source, and the source is Ein Sof, how will it now be presentable to go into the vessels, which are limited? That's the question he's targeting. However, before he continues, he's just going to throw in almost like another parenthesis, continuation of this parenthesis. But now he says, "Be'emes." In truth, gam bezeh, even in siluk, even if we're applying a deeper tzimtzum, a more powerful tzimtzum, which would be in a manner of siluk legamri, siluk meaning a complete removal, like happens to the spheros en kates level of the Ein Sof, which that's removed completely. As long, the Rebbe says, as the author, the Rebbe Rashab, he says, as long as we're still dealing with light. It's not light always, when you have a siluk means you have a previous light and you remove the light completely and then you bring a new light. If it's light is davuk. Light is always connected. So even a light that is born out of there's an original light and then you hide that light completely but then it gives birth to another light. The secondary light is not utterly new. It has still resemblance to the previous light, even though you shut it down completely. The reason for that is because the nature of a light has to be davuk, is davuk. If it's dveikus, which means it's connected to the source. If it's connected to the source, it has to be some reflection on the source. It's not like the real element of ischachus, where you're kind of completely abandoning what was and moving to something, doing a complete metamorphosis, is only possible by Kalim. Because Kalim are created, like the way they evolve, vessels evolve, is from a complete disconnect from source. We discussed that concept earlier. Or light is always a continuum. There's always a connection. There's always so therefore he's saying, but in light itself, there is gradations of it. There is a level of light that's b'derech miut. Over there you have a lot continuing from what once was. A lot of it is continuing because it's miut. Miut means it's only a diminishment. You didn't dim it. You only dimmed the light. You didn't make it disappear completely. But he's saying now, but even if it's b'derech siluk, which is a complete removal, there is still something because it's light. It's not totally new. Should I walk upon him? It's still connected to its source. And real, totally new, which is what we're looking for over here, actually. Over here, we're looking for, if we want the light to be able to go into vessels, which the vessels are limited, it would help us if the lights that are going in would be a totally new thing, would be completely disconnected from the Or Ein Sof, because that would mean that these lights are not Ein Sof. Of course, they can go into vessels because they're not Ein Sof. But we don't have it. Why don't we have that? Because we're dealing with light over here. So he says, real is chatsha shaykh rak b'metzias dava k'may by kelim. But in any case, in our case, we don't even have to come on to this, because in our case, the relationship of the lights of the Kav, which will later become the lights of Atzilus, to the shoresh of these lights, which is the 10 Esa Spheres Agnuzai, stage B in the Or Ein Sof, the transitioning between them is not even b'derech siluk. You don't even have a complete removal. All you have is a diminishment. If you have a diminishment, you have a lot continuing of what was before. And if that's the case, of course, what's continuing, and since the lights initially are pashut, that means even though they're Esa Spheres Agnuzais, but they're pashut, and pashut means you don't see in them any design or any definitions. And therefore, the light that's now shining, even post-Tzimtzum, has to be still a little bit of that light, which means it's pashut. You still have the question, how can they go into Kalim? That's his question. V'chol giloi me'helem, and he finishes the parentheses and he continues. Now we're past the parentheses. V'chol giloi me'helem, and every revelation from the concealed state, harei hagiloi, so the revelation, me'ein ha'helem, is somewhat reflecting the concealed state, what was before. And what kishem, and therefore he's solidifying his question. And since the helem is in the concealed light, the Esa Spheres Agnuzais, while they were still concealed, right, is in a state of pshitus, is simple. So what is revealed is going to continue reflecting the character or the lack of character of what was the concealment, what was in the original state, what was in the concealed state, which is b'chinas pshitus. So if that's the case, how then can the kalim then match up with the light? In truth, it's not really pashut, because what he's saying is, in truth of truths, even you're right, it's a reflection of the Esa Spheres Agnuzis. But even in that original Esa Spheres Agnuzis, there's slight hints and notes of vanilla and chocolate. I mean, I'm using that just for a silly example. There's still, and by the way, the root of vanilla is probably chesed, it's white. And the root of chocolate is black, it's probably gevura, that kind of thing. But everything has a shoresh. So, don't quote me on that, I don't know, but that makes sense to me. But whatever it is, even there is it's just so subtle. So there, the reduction and even if it's only b'derech miut, is bringing once it's diminishing the brilliance of the light. That's what it is doing. It's a miut. It's dimming it. It's allowing for these hints and notes of subtle elements of it to be more tasteable, more sensed. As he says, be'emes in truth, esa spheres the oiros, the 10 spheres of the lights. Oh no, I see. I made a mistake here. I thought he's saying that that in their source that's true as well. But what he's saying is like, no, you're right. You're right. The pshitus is carrying, I'm sorry, totally off what I just said. when we just said that, again, erase, delete what I just said, all about this vanilla chocolate, all this. That's also true, but that's part of the evolution that he's explaining over here. But over here, he's really saying like this: the lights that we are now producing after the tzimtzum is not yet chesed and gevura. You're right. If immediately after the tzimtzum it would be chesed and gevura, and it would be real defined energies, then you would have a question. If it's giloy ha'elam, if it's a conceal of what is, if it's a revelation of what was in the concealed state, how do you suddenly jump to chesed and gevura to real substance? So he's saying no, because even after the tzimtzum, and when the light of the kav comes out, emerges into a revealed state, you still don't have chesed and gevura. You have spherois, that are chachma, chesed, gevura, but it's still dominated by an energy of pshitos. It's still very pasha. It's only that now it's ready for the next stage for it to go into vessels. When it will go into vessels, the vessels will grasp it. Let's explain. In the 10 spheres of the lights, and they remain pashut because they're carrying over what they had earlier. That is continuing on of it. Since it's only b'derech miyut, there is something coming through. What's coming through? That these 10 spheres are still pshitas. Legabe esa spheres the kelim. In compared to the esa spheres of the kelim are real definitions. The oiros are not. Commission is ba'al el Perek Yudal, like we said, Perek Yudal, especially when before they go into the kelim. Makom. Nevertheless, ma'achar since shegam b'sharsha, so you have an element of pshitas that's there, but on the other hand, they're now possible for them to go into the vessels, and then the lights will become far less pashut and far more defined, and that is all because that in their place of origin. When we say place of origin, we mean all the way before the tzimtzum, there were already these notes there. Here is where he's saying when I jumped ahead. Since all even in their source and in their root, there is essa spheres. The ima yoshem b'pchinas pshitus, even though they're in a state of pshitus in that state, because they're davuk to the Orin Sof. Because again, Orin Sof B, which contains 10 spheres, is part of Or Ein Sof. It's the Malchus of the Ein Sof. So it's still Davuk in the Or Ein Sof A. And therefore that simplicity and undefined element of the light is very much overpowering these hidden Eser Spheres and keeping the light very pashut. And more than that, and even if you might say that the Eser Spheres are already moving already into a position away from the Or Ein Sof, like Or Ein Sof A and Or Ein Sof B are already separating to a certain degree, but still, each of them is iskala l'shem. No, I'm sorry, l'shem ba'Or Ein Sof, because of their dveikus and integration. No, he still means because they're still unified in the Or Ein Sof. Commission is ba'al el Perek Chaf Aleph, and therefore, it's true that the pshitus is there, but it's the pshitus is swallowing their differences. But it doesn't mean that there isn't differences. They are still essa spheres. Then, when they get drawn, and it's true that tzimtzum is only a miyut, but since they're being drawn through the tzimtzum, which what the tzimtzum is doing is that it's producing each one on their own, on their own. Each light now becomes b'pchinas mitzius nikeres al kapan. It becomes, it's like taking the beis, the reish, the vav, and the chaf. When they were all four letters were together in one word, you didn't even notice the letters, you noticed only the concept. But the letters were there. And now when you're separating them, you start noticing far more the letter. So the same is over here. Once it's the tzimtzum reduces the light and produces each one separately, we're soon going to see how do you see that each one is put separately in the kav. Kav seems to be one beam of light, but we're going to see later how that really represents the concept of the spheres becoming differentiated. So now they become Metzius Nikeres. When earlier the spheres were not Nikeres. They were lost because of their submersion in the Or Ein Sof. They weren't Nikar. They weren't recognized. Now they become a Metzius Nikeres. They become recognizable. Al Kolpanu. Harehem be'erach. They have now been conditioned sheyislabish b'pchenas hakelim, to become enclosed in the vessels. Ulekamim Perek Kuftazayin Yisbar Oit Siba Lazeh V'Haba Hatalia. Later he will say another Siba, that the reason it's able to go into the Kalim is because the Kalim have a certain Behiros, a certain similar to the light element, meaning now he's blaming it. The reason now he's putting the main connection from the lights to the vessels, he's putting it on the lights. That the lights are already, they're already in a state of b'chinas metzius nikeres. They're already, the flavor is already to a certain degree pronounced. Later he puts it on the vessels, that the vessels have a certain pshitus to them. So it will kind of work both together. The definitions of the light gets married to the pshitus of the keli. The keli also has a certain beyond keli element to it. For example, he says that a glass window that allows lights, if it's a very clean window, so it's the cleanness, it's the pshitus of the window, of the glass, that connects to the brightness of the light. So in order to make a shidduch, whenever you're making a unity between two entities, you have to find the him in the her, and you have to find the her in the him, and then you can connect the two. It's almost like the female of the male connects to the male masculine in the woman, and that's how you connect them. So he's saying in chat over there, there's another reason why they can connect, but over here he puts it mainly. But then once it becomes enclosed in the vessels, it becomes completely mislabish and grasped. Now the light becomes not just mitzius nikeres, not just recognized. The light becomes already very substantial. It becomes light of chachma, chesed, and the light of chesed, like the substance of the vessels. Okay, I didn't even realize that we did so much over time. But okay, everyone, may we merit to see Mashiach today.